Another week, boys and girls, and another George video update. This time, we're going to focus on the spicy interview with Collider between our boy George and the ongoing feud behind the scenes with House of the Dragon showrunner Ryan Condal. Of course, Wins gets a brief mention, and George gets a bit sentimental with his stories being adapted, but some of it needs to be corrected. We're going to be talking about all of that and more on today's video, so hit that like button, subscribe, comment, you know the drill. Also, before we begin, quick channel update. If you were wondering why I've been gone for the last few weeks, then that's because YouTube decided to demonetize my channel. Now, I'm not saying HBO was behind that, but them coming after me, specifically all the George Condal videos, may have had something to do with it. However, I was able to appeal the decision and everything is fine and dandy, but it could happen again in the future. So, if you would like to support the channel and what we do here, consider doing so over on Patreon or YouTube memberships. It's only $1 a month, and not only will you be getting some extra content on the side, you'll also be helping us out greatly. But with that out of the way, let's get to it. So as always, let's get some background on all this. Who is Collider and what's been going on with our boy George? Well, they're a website that focuses mainly on pop culture and entertainment news, and they managed to get some interviews with George last month, who was out promoting the new movie, In the Lost Lands. If you haven't heard of it, then that's no surprise, considering it flopped really badly, and it's another L on director Paul W.S. Anderson's belt. We covered this a while back, where George decided to attend the premiere of this film over attending the House of the Dragon Season 2 FYC panel, which was already the first red flag. George attended the Season 1 panel, so if that doesn't tell you where he's at with the writers, then the next set of clips will. After the film, Collider sat down with George, Mila Jovovich, and Anderson to discuss the movie, and the interviewer knew exactly what she was doing when she asked George the red and green flags of working with someone wanting to adapt his stories. For those of you who don't remember, George put out a blog post many months ago called the Adaptation Tango, where he complained that writers and showrunners in Hollywood take stories and instead of trying to adapt it faithfully, they try to make it their own and change it up. Months later, he would release another blog post called Toxic Butterflies, where he called out Ryan Condal specifically. We covered both of these situations extensively on the channel, and if you're new here, I'll leave a link in the description below. But the interviewer, again, she knew exactly what she was doing when she asked this question, and George goes off on a long rant about it. But here's the part I found the most interesting. Take a listen.
You know, you've asked a very big question, and ones that I've been blogging about and getting in trouble for. A writer, in some ways, is the hardest one to say about this, because I once wrote a story called Portraits of His Children, which was about a writer and being haunted by his fictional characters. But I don't have any children, and I think a lot of writers, these are my children, these stories that I create. And you have two choices when you sell them for adaptations. You can try to get involved, or you can just, all right, I wrote a book. Here's they're making a movie. It's a different thing. And sometimes it's good to do one, and sometimes it's good to do the other. James M. Cain, very famous writer of the 30s, he wrote The Postman Always Lives Twice and all that, was very famously asked by a reporter not unlike you, as to, what do you think of what Hollywood has done to your books? And he answered very famously, Hollywood hasn't done anything to my books. They're right there. They're on the shelf. Not a word's been changed. And that is the answer that you give sometimes.
So I agree with George about how the book and the movie or the show are different things. He mentioned the author who said that Hollywood hadn't done anything to his works. They're sitting on the shelf right there. And again, well, I agree with that. I also see the downside of a bad adaptation. When I was younger, I was a big fan of the Aragon book series, and I was super excited to see it become a movie, and it was bad. Now, of course, it being bad doesn't completely destroy the franchise, but the prospect of Aragon being part of the cultural zeitgeist like other fantasy novels at the time went up in smoke. The author kept writing more books, of course, in the series, but because so many people's memory of the franchise is strictly tied to that one bad movie, you can understand why it had no chance after the fact. The books will always stand out on their own, sure, but having that push from a successful adaptation definitely helps. Ice and Fire was always low-key popular online, but the average person wouldn't have known words like Lannister or Khaleesi if it weren't for how successful HBO's adaptation of it was. Some books are immune to this, like The Hobbit or Dune, but some aren't. I remember people gushing about how much they love The Mortal Instruments or Stephen King's The Dark Tower, and now it barely gets a mention anywhere anymore. The books will always be there, sure, and some are immune to bad adaptations, but a majority of them suffer long term from such a bad stain on their legacy. But let's continue.
But there's also something very special for a writer if you sell your book to a movie, and maybe you're involved with the movie, maybe you're not, maybe you don't see any of it until opening day, and but when you see it on opening day, if it's good, and if it's good in the way that you wrote it, it's like your dreams have come alive. These children of yours, these fictional children, there they are on the screen, and it really is. I can't describe how great a feeling that is, how exciting it is.
See, I sympathize with George here, and I can only imagine how much of a euphoric feeling it must be to write these stories and see them come alive to universal praise. That must be great. But the way he's saying it, he's kind of trying to bring up the complaints he's had before, and for that we need to touch back on that blog post called The Adaptation Tango, where he complains that showrunners and writers try to do their own thing and make it their own, and how much of an issue he has with it. And honestly, George is not alone. The audience has an issue with it too. For me, it's The Witcher on Netflix. I absolutely love the franchise, but what they did to it in the Netflix adaptation should be studied by scientists on how the hell it went so wrong so quick. But at the same time, George is being a bit of a hypocrite because he himself has said on 2 separate occasions on how much he loved the changes made to his work. Ultimately, it just comes down to change is only okay when it's good and works out, and it's bad when it sucks. Game of Thrones had a lot of changes back in the day that people praised all the time. Arya and Tywin in Season 2 was a Dave and Dan original, and it worked. Change is good when it's good, and it's bad when it's bad. Let's continue.
My position in regard to this is not always involved. Sometimes they just, we're buying your book, and here's your check, and, see you at the premiere if you even get an invitation. But it's nice when they do involve you, and even more when you have the feeling that they listen and have a understanding of the original material, because many times they don't. I'm not talking about anybody that I'm involved with here, so please don't turn it around to some current project. But
yeah, sure, you're not talking about anybody specific. Speaking of him totally not talking about Ryan Condal, the interviewer actually asked him about Ryan Condal, and this is George's response.
I speak about this because I know Ryan Condal is a big fan of a lot of your work, and he's read your books, and he's like, kind of like a lore master. And I'm curious about working with him specifically and his team, and how that's benefited for you as the author of the original.
I've worked with a lot of people. At the moment, I just got back from London and meeting with Ira Parker and his team who are doing Dunk and Egg. And I've seen Dunk and Egg, the first season, and it's great, and now they're working on the second season. Those are 2 characters who are really special to me, and they're unusual characters. They're not what most people would accept in a fantasy story. It's a little softer, it's a little more humorous.
Yeah, I'm going to end that clip there because clearly that feud is still going on, and of course, at no point does it even mention Condal's name or answer the question. And did you notice George's expression the entire time? Yeah, it's Jover for him and Condal. But good news, he mentioned how stoked he is over showrunner Ira Parker's adaptation of the Dunk and Egg novellas, so that's a plus here. Before we do go on to the next clip, he does kind of take a jab at the House of the Dragon's writing team, and it ties into how writing Winds of Winter is a bit better in that regard. Here's what he had to say.
Like I said, this is a complicated business, and it's you really never know. It's always changing too. A writer starts a career and he's doing a show, and then he gets hired to do another show, and a new showrunner comes in, the ratings are low, the ratings are high. The books, there's always the books, and I'm aware of that. People think but no, I have to get back. I have to finish the books. That's the one thing I'm completely in control of. There's no budget limitations. There's no other, executives on the studio side that I have to please, or other writers with different views. The books are what I'm going to make them, and I think the one I'm writing is coming pretty well, but I wish it would come faster.
To wrap it up, George talks about one of his other non-Game of Thrones books he'd like to see adapted, and he names this one specifically.
But I think maybe my favorite child is my vampire book, Fever Dream. That until I started with Game of Thrones was definitely the best of my preceding novels. It's a historical horror novel set on the Mississippi River in the 1850s, and particularly about a steamboat captain and the steamboat, the great steamboat he dreams of building in 1857. Turned out pretty well. Was nominated for some awards, didn't win any. But I like it a lot, and I think it would be a great movie.
Are there any plans for adapting it?
Well, many years ago, I had a deal with Disney, and I wrote the screenplay myself for Fever Dream, and it turned out pretty well. But they didn't make it, and rights came back to me. So I have not only the book rights, but I have the rights to my own screenplay. So if it is made, I don't want to hire some other writer to have his version. I want my version.
So because of this interview, I actually started reading Fever Dream, and so far I'm liking it quite a bit, but knowing George's track record with his other non-Ice and Fire stuff being adapted, I'm not in too much of a rush to see this one come to life. If you'd like to check out Fever Dream, I'll attach an affiliate link to Amazon for both the novel and the comic if you guys are interested. But guys, that is it for today. Thank you so much for watching. As always, let me know what you thought of the interview. Was there something George said that you agreed or disagreed with? Let me know your thoughts below, and be sure to hit that like and subscribe button if you haven't already. It helps out a lot. And also consider supporting the channel over on Patreon or YouTube memberships. It helps keeps us afloat, and your support is greatly appreciated. Links in the description below. But once again, guys, thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you all next time. Have a good one.